Hey everyone, over the past year, I've been using this YouTube channel to document my journey to financial freedom, which is an ambitious milestone, but it's something I'm hoping to reach before I turn 30 years old. Now, I don't expect everybody to reach financial freedom as early as I am. I landed a good job out of college, didn't graduate with any debt, and am extremely frugal. So I might be a bit of an outlier, but I do believe that anybody with a good job or frugal habits, ideally both, can reach financial independence at a relatively early age. And that's why it absolutely blew my mind when I came across this video from CBS, which claimed that over half of Americans earning over $100,000 a year are still living paycheck to paycheck. So this week, I wanted to go through this video and highlight some of my biggest takeaways. And after that, I'll talk about how I'm using my own $100,000 a year salary to reach financial freedom. The first interesting comment comes within the first couple of seconds.
Banks are bracing for an influx of defaulting payments as higher prices across the board force Americans to use credit cards.
This statement really surprised me. If you can't afford a purchase, you should not be putting it on a credit card in the first place. Racking up large credit card bills on things that you know you can't afford should not even be an option. Personally, I use my credit card like it's a debit card. I never make a purchase unless I have the money in my bank account to cover it, and I pay my credit card balance in full automatically. And if for some crazy reason you do have to take on debt, a credit card is not the place to do it. Since credit card debt is one of the most expensive forms of debt, it should be one of the last ways that you use to cover an expense. But anyway, let's jump about a minute into this video.
Certainly last year and throughout the early days of the pandemic, since the onset of the lockdowns, we've seen that credit card delinquencies have been historically low. So now
Mhm.
we're starting to see a ramp up period. Given the inflation, given the economic environment that we've been in, we're going to start seeing more people sitting there and saying, I can't pay my credit card at the end of the month.
Okay, so maybe somebody that knows more about economics can explain this to me, but I find it really interesting that credit card defaults were at a low point during the pandemic. I was still in college for the worst part of the pandemic, but it seemed to me like there was a massive amount of unemployment and a lot of things were becoming a lot more expensive. And sure, inflation and interest rates were both spiking after the pandemic, but even so, I figured more people would be back working and getting their finances under control. So again, just pretty surprised to see this trend.
Why didn't people pay down their credit cards and then go, great, let's keep it this way?
I think we're facing a double whammy here.
Mm.
So we ended up sitting there and having inflation hit so many American households. And of course, at first we saw gas prices, car prices go up, and now we're seeing it across the board. I mean, look, the price of eggs is just crazy these days, right?
Yeah.
And so we're seeing that, but we're also seeing high interest rates. Obviously, the Federal Reserve is really trying to tamp down on those inflation rates. And of course, they're doing that by increasing interest rates. And so we're going to sit there and start to see that you may actually be putting less on the credit card, but the interest rates are higher if you're carrying that debt for longer periods of time.
Okay, so I do know a lot has changed since this video came out, and this video is a little dated by egg and gas prices. I released a video not too long ago where I did a food saving challenge, and that video was also pretty dated by the price of eggs. As for gas prices, let me give a quick plug for riding a bike. I literally don't own a car, I just have a bicycle, so when gas prices were $5 a gallon, I did not have to pay a penny. That was pretty awesome, and I recently released a video where I talked about my experience, so make sure to check that out. But the other thing I want to point out is that credit card bills only rank 5th when people are asked to prioritize their expenses. And look, I understand that utilities and internet are really important to a lot of people, but if I was paying 20+% interest on my credit card debt, I would want to get rid of that as fast as possible. Either way, just not a situation you want to put yourself in. But now we get to the really interesting part of the video where they start to talk about why people earning $100,000 a year are still living paycheck to paycheck.
So that brings me to this really interesting statistic that more and more people who make at least 100K a year say they're living paycheck to paycheck. And, this has been a number that has been a percentage that's been ticking up, I think, since the summer. I think it was in the 30s in the summer. Now it's much higher than that in terms of percentage of people saying that. A lot of people are going to hear you make 100 grand. I don't get it. How is it possible that you can make that amount of money and still live paycheck to paycheck?
It's interesting. We see this across the board. I mean, look, almost two-thirds of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah, okay, I want to make a couple of points here. According to Zippia, about 18% of Americans are earning $100,000 a year. With around 330 million Americans, that's about 60 million people. And that means that around 30 million people are earning $100,000 a year and still living paycheck to paycheck. But also, 64% of Americans living paycheck to paycheck, that's around 200 million people. That makes my head kind of want to explode. That means that the vast majority of people cannot afford to lose their jobs, which is really scary because that obviously happens all of the time. But even if people don't lose their jobs, an unexpected medical bill, car repairs, or any other sort of thing could lead to a really big expense. And if you can't afford to lose your job, you probably couldn't cover that expense either. The whole reason I'm trying to reach financial freedom is so that I don't have to rely on earning more money to survive, much less a biweekly paycheck. So this statistic is really scary to me, and it's why I make these YouTube videos in the first place.
And we are seeing that really when it comes to lower and middle income Americans, those rates are staying fairly stable. Where we're seeing a lot of the increase right now is among those who are higher earning in Americans. And of course, it's one of those situations where when you look at it on first glance, you're like, oh my God, you can't pay for your bills. But
Hmm.
I think matter of a couple of issues. We're obviously seeing inflation hit these households. Maybe they were able to carry that a little bit longer, but then we're also sitting there and they need to maybe make some adjustments now. But again, we're also seeing economic conditions shift. There's been volatile markets. There have been a number of issues. Again, high interest rates that are impacting these households.
Okay, so here's what doesn't make sense to me. Earlier, they said that the number of Americans earning $100,000 a year and living paycheck to paycheck has increased sharply, from 30 something percent to a little over 50%. I don't understand why the percentage of people living paycheck to paycheck would increase so sharply in this group of people earning so much money, but not in any other group of people earning less money. Sure, you can say that economic conditions have worsened and that interest rates are high, but nobody should be better prepared for this than people earning $100,000 a year. These are the people that had the most time to adjust their spending during the pandemic, and the people with the most room in their budget to make adjustments. So I just find it extremely difficult to understand why people earning so much money are living paycheck to paycheck.
I also, think that of course we always talk about lifestyle creep. Certainly that could have been a factor. We did see obviously, a number of Americans saying, "Hey, I'm still celebrating my holidays. I'm still going out and spending and buying those gifts." And that of course means that you may have some debt overhang come January, February.
Okay, this is the part that really kills me. It blows my mind that despite a global pandemic and a war in Europe that's disrupting supply chains, people would still allow themselves to experience lifestyle creep. If you're like me, you take the economic turmoil of the world over the last few years as a sign that you need to increase your savings and make your finances immune to the craziness of the world. And that's why I also want to take a second to go over what I do with my own six-figure salary. There was sort of a time last year where I was living paycheck to paycheck, but that's only because I had decided to max out my Roth 401k despite not having started work until the middle of July. So over half of my paycheck was going straight to my retirement account, and taxes and my bills took up most of the rest. But I don't have to do that anymore, which is why I thought I'd quickly run through where my money goes to. Right now, each one of my paychecks is about $4,100, but only about $2,000 of that makes it to my bank account. First, I pay about $1,100 between federal and state taxes. So yeah, that's already over 25% of my income. Then about $950 goes to either my Roth 401k or my traditional 401k. Recently, I've been contributing most of my money to my Roth 401k, but I might change that in the future. Then $56 is deducted for health insurance, which is a pretty good deal because my company pays a lot more than that. So that means every 2 weeks, I get about $2,000 in my bank account. And that's way, way more money than I actually spend, which is why I have an automatic deposit of $500 every week to my investment account. That means I only keep about a quarter of my salary to actually pay my bills. But given that I only spend about $1,500 a month on my living expenses, I still accumulate some extra cash. And every now and then, I'll send some more money over to my investment account. So how people live paycheck to paycheck on $100,000 a year is absolutely beyond me. So in this video, I didn't really have the time to get into details about how I'm reaching financial freedom. But I did recently make a video where I broke down my step-by-step plan, which I'll link right here. In that video, I explain my earning, saving, and investment projections up until I reach financial freedom. So I think you'll really like it, and I hope you check it out next. I'll see you next time.